Ever wonder what the secret sauce is for the super successful? Well, today we're cracking open the playbook of billionaire investor Ray Dalio. And what's wild is he built his entire framework not from his biggest wins, but from one of his most crushing failures. All right, let's get into it.
And it all kicks off with this idea right here. Dalio's whole philosophy, it's built on a bedrock of humility. For him, success isn't about being the smartest guy in the room. Nope. It's about having a system for dealing with that giant ocean of stuff you just don't know.
Okay, so how do you even begin to navigate all that uncertainty? You use principles. And for Dalio, these aren't just, vague motivational quotes. They're rock-solid, smart strategies for handling the kinds of situations life just keeps throwing at you, again and again. And he learned them the hard way, mostly by messing up and then really thinking about why.
Now, the foundation for absolutely everything else is what he calls being a hyper-realist. And listen, this isn't about being negative or cynical. It's about being radically honest. It's about seeing the world as it actually is, warts and all, because that, and only that, is the real starting line for making any kind of change or chasing any dream.
And check out how simple this is. This is basically Dalio's formula for a successful life. But notice what's right there, smack in the middle, embracing reality. Your big dreams, your grit and determination, they're pretty much useless if they're not connected to what's actually true. But here's the thing. Dalio didn't just wake up one morning and decide to be a hyper-realist. Oh no. This lesson was basically beaten into him by one catastrophic failure. A single moment back in 1982 that completely humbled him and forced him to build the very principles we're talking about today.
So let's set the scene. It's the early 80s, the economy's a mess, and a young Ray Dalio is totally convinced he knows what's coming next, a full-blown economic depression in the US. He was so sure, honestly, so arrogant about it, that he went on TV and bet everything his company had on this prediction.
And yeah, he was wrong. I mean, spectacularly, epically dead wrong. The depression he predicted never happened. In fact, the total opposite happened. The U.S. economy kicked off one of the biggest bull markets in history. Dalio said later it was like getting hit in the head with a baseball bat.
The fallout was just brutal. He lost so much money he had to fire all of his employees until he was the only one left. He was so broke he had to borrow $4,000 from his dad just to cover his family's bills. This was absolute rock bottom.
But it was right there in that moment of intense, humiliating pain that he stumbled upon his single most important idea, this equation. He realized that pain is a signal. It's not just a bad feeling, it's a puzzle. And if you have the courage to reflect on it and solve it, that's where all the progress comes from. The failure wasn't the end, it was the beginning.
And that huge insight, that pain plus reflection equals progress, well, it became the cornerstone of a practical, repeatable system that he created for getting better at pretty much anything. He calls it the 5-step process.
And it's really just a simple loop. First, you set clear goals. Then you're going to hit problems. That's where the pain comes in. But instead of quitting, you stop and diagnose those problems to find out what the real root cause is. Then you design a new plan. And finally, you just got to do it. You execute. You do this over and over and over again, and that's how you evolve.
And this isn't some self-help gimmick. Dalio sees this loop everywhere. He says it's basically a law of the universe. Think about it. Everything in nature is either adapting to reality or it's dying. This 5-step process is just our way of doing that consciously.
Okay, so that process sounds simple enough, right? So why doesn't everybody just do it and become super successful? Well, because, as Dalio found out, there are 2 huge roadblocks hardwired into our brains that are constantly getting in the way.
The first one is the ego barrier. You know that voice in your head? The one that absolutely hates being wrong and sees criticism as a personal attack? That's your ego. The second is the blind spot barrier. And this one's simple. You can't see what you can't see. We all have huge gaps in how we see the world.
So how in the world do you get past those barriers? Dalio had to make a really profound mental switch. He had to consciously decide to trade in that cheap thrill of being told he was right for the much deeper joy of finding out what's actually true. And that changed everything. This led him to what he calls the holy grail of good decision-making, radical open-mindedness. This isn't just about listening to other people. It's about actively hunting down the smartest people you can find who disagree with you, and then trying like hell to see the world through their eyes. It's about using disagreement to discover your own blind spots.
And the effect of doing this? It's huge. Dalio describes it perfectly here. It's like your life goes from being in black and white to being in full, vibrant color. All of a sudden, you see all these new dimensions and possibilities that were invisible to you before. So this entire process, embracing reality, learning from pain, getting over his own ego, it all led Dalio to one final really powerful insight that completely redefines what success is all about.
He came to realize that the goals we're all chasing, the money, the promotion, the achievements, they aren't actually the prize. They're just the bait. They're there to lure you into something far more important.
And here it is. The real reward is the struggle itself. The process of facing down those tough problems and forcing yourself to get better, that's the whole point. The person you have to become to achieve your goals is so much more valuable than the goals themselves. The evolution? That's the reward.
So, let's wrap this up. What are the big takeaways? First, embrace reality as it is. Remember the equation, pain plus reflection equals progress. Use that 5-step process to constantly evolve. Fight your own ego and blind spots by being radically open-minded. And never forget that the real reward is found in the struggle.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. Armed with this framework, looking at your own life, what's the next big challenge you're willing to take on? Not just for what you'll get, but for the person it will force you to become.